Hey, welcome back to the Modern Farming Podcast, where we bring you insights directly from the field about food, farming, and the incredible environment that we all live in. Brad, we just came off, I don't know, 4 incredible episodes. I don't even know where to begin. We already did a recap a couple weeks ago. Today, we want to recap a lot about the last 2 weeks. We had 2 absolutely amazing, actually 3 absolutely amazing guests on the show. And we're really blessed to have that. I mean, our little podcast is growing. Thank you to everybody, by the way. But we've had some really big hitters in the space, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I think especially as people start getting a grasp of what soil health is and dig into that. And I mean, we've had 4. If you follow that, they were rock stars in the industry, and
Yeah.
the information that they have and know is just amazing.
Yeah, and the places they've all been. I mean, we're talking to people who reside here in the United States, but uh, all of them are all worldly, right? They've been all over the world. They're doing research. So we're coming down from a little bit of a high here. Just really excited to have the caliber of guests we've had on. Really blessed, and so we thank you all for staying tuned with us and subscribing and liking all of our numbers every week. Rachel gives us numbers, and we're growing, and that's really exciting around here for everybody. But I do want to say, when we started, there was 3 of us. Logan, Cuts, Brad, and myself. And you've noticed that Logan hasn't been on the last few episodes. And really, Logan is focusing on the things he should be focusing on. One is uh, he's a lot younger than Brad and I, which is kind of easy to do. But he has like 3 jobs, or 2 jobs for sure. He runs a business. He has a day job. He's extremely involved in his church and his family. He consults all over the globe. And oh, by the way, he's still going to school, going to college. So he wants to get his master's, and he's working on that. So Logan has stepped away for a time. I'm sure he'll be back. We lean on him heavily on our website, and he does a lot of blogs. You see him on a lot of our social media as well. Just a unbelievable resource that we've had, and a really, really standout individual. So we miss him. We know we'll have him back, but we just wanted to let everybody know that, Logan didn't just get voted off the island. He went and he had to focus on his studies, his family, and his job. So to be honest, Brad, I don't know how he was doing it before.
No, I don't know, and I'm sure we'll bring him back on especially when we're doing stuff that's in his arena. Like we'll bring John Lundgren back and talk about beneficial insects, and then we'll
Yeah.
set that up where Logan can be on for that one.
Yeah. Geez, we could put those 2 in front of the camera and walk away for a couple of
Right.
days.
Exactly.
Well, okay, great. So let's dig in here. I mean, let's see. 3 weeks ago now, we had Ann and David Montgomery on, and really fascinating. Brad and I were talking before the show here this morning, and they're really on the other side of the spectrum compared to Kittredge or Will with White Oak Pastures. They started more like in the kind of the backyard. I mean, David is what is he? A geomorphologist, or
Yeah. Yeah.
geomorph geologist. So
Geologist for sure.
yeah, so
Study
and, and
rock.
then and then Anne was, kind of when they moved to Washington, he's a professor. She was tilling around in the soil and really, transforming their backyard soil, and then something clicked. And so now they're both completely invested in soil health, soil repairing soils, and then in just improving agriculture on maybe a smaller local basis. Would you say, Brad?
Yeah, no, I think so. They're big on the community farms, but the research that they did, and the going back 100 years when people were figuring this stuff out, stuff that you and I are trying to figure out and get points across today, that they went and did all that research, and in their book you'll see just it's amazing how deep they dug into agriculture to and then equated it to soil, to plant, to animal, to human. It's they cross the whole spectrum,
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
in that.
It's just really fascinating. I mean, you don't have to be a farmer or an agriculturist or someone who has studied agriculture to to make a difference. I really honestly believe that there's two sides of this, and we talk about it all the time. There's the big ag side, right? There's the corn, the soybean, the wheat, the rice, the things that feed the world. Um, but locally, there is so much happening locally. Even for us here in Florida, I go to these farmers markets. I talk to a lot of people, and every week it seems like when I go to a new farmers market or I go somewhere different, I find someone else on a very small scale doing incredible things either in their backyard or in their garage. I mean, a couple weeks ago I met some folks who grow mushrooms, and these mushrooms at the table were just unbelievable. They were gorgeous, and they weren't any more expensive than what we find at the grocery store. Matter of fact, you can't find lion's mane and things like that at most of our grocery stores. So I just think that what Ann and David represent, what they're doing, some people might pass off as backyard kind of growers or something like that. But like you said, the amount of knowledge, the amount of time and investment they've spent to write these books, to understand what's happening to our topsoil, and then trying to make a change on a small scale and telling as many people as they can, I think is really fascinating. And I absolutely know that this world needs more people like Ann and David, but I think it's fascinating that they're making their change in their community.
Yeah, and like, the concepts are the same, whether you're in your backyard garden or you're a 3,000-acre watermelon, green bean, tomato grower in Florida. The concepts are the same. On smaller scale, you can do a lot of things quickly because you're not worried about cost per acre. If your garden is 1,000 square feet, you don't care if you spend $200 on that garden to grow really good food, whereas 200 times 40,000, then you're at $8,000, whatever that is an acre, and that's
Yeah.
just not doable. So, but yeah, the concepts are the same, and there's little things commercial growers can do along the way to just improve, soil and make all this fun stuff happen.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point, for the listeners who are not involved in agriculture on a daily basis like we are. Um, you might hear us talk, and you might hear people like Dan and David and Ann and Will, and it might sound sort of easy. Like if they're doing it, the science is there, the data is there. Kittredge has got data from all over the globe. Why isn't everybody doing it? You might even say, why is this not mandatory? Why is the government not forcing us to? And the scalability of
Yeah,
what Brad just said is the limiting factor. You and I could do a lot of things on our yard. I've got a 11,000 square foot yard here, right? I've got a corner lot. I could do a lot of things in my grass, and I probably spend more money on my lawn than most of our farmers are able to do on an acre, just because I have 11,000 square feet. But
right.
when you start talking about 20,000 acres that, you know, our margins are not great everywhere. They're better on some crops. Strawberry and tomatoes have a better margin, but it also takes an enormous amount of people, um, industry, machines, trucking, management. I mean, just a ton of. So what I'm saying is, it might seem really simple when you hear a lot of our guests talk about this regenerative piece or taking care of the soil, but you gotta extrapolate that out to 20,000 acres and a few hundred people that are working on a farm. There isn't always that extra cash flow per acre, and I think that's a challenge. But like you said, I think every grower would tell you they'd love to do more. It just has to pencil.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I have a large grower that said, I would love to take uh, certain farms out of rotation for a year or two, and put cover crops and cattle and mob graze and do all that. He said, I can't afford to lose that those fields for 1 or 2 or 3 years. So they all kind of understand it and want to do it, but so you've got to figure out how to integrate, so that could be just a cover crop in the fallow season, or, there's no-till farmers out there, and all that makes a difference. But it's hard to scale, and it takes time, and the movement is small and short. It takes time to move the needle, and it costs money to move the needle. So but the good is coming. I mean, when we get into start talking about Dan and what Kittredge is doing with his technology of measuring nutrients in food, I think that's, like I said before, that's what'll change the game.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this a lot. What Anne said towards the end of our interview was, I really love what she said, and I won't be able to paraphrase it as well as she had. But she talked about how there's a very direct connection, and this is a no-brainer, right? Once you hear it, you're like, yeah, no kidding. You don't have to be a scientist to know that the soil microbes, the soil health has a direct effect on nutrition of our food, right? So highly degraded, poorly managed soils aren't going to produce a fruit or a vegetable with the nutrient content of a soil that is intensely managed for that purpose. And I, when she said it, I was like, yeah, everyone gets this. But again, back to your scalability, until the industry, and I think it's going to work this way, until the consumer can demand or can choose between a higher nutritional, let's say an orange. They have an orange that is been grown regeneratively or with some sort of, cultural practices that increase soil health that will directly affect its nutrient value.
Right.
So you got that sitting on your store shelf versus a normal, conventionally grown orange. Until the consumer can say that this orange that was grown on a sustainable or a soil health program has 4 or 5 times the nutritional value as your conventional grown, until the consumer has the ability to make that decision, I don't think the industry is going to change, because right now everything that comes out of our farms pretty much has the same nutritional value. I spent most of the winter here in Florida testing bricks on tomatoes and strawberries, and from grower to grower, field to field, top to bottom in the state of Florida, I got the same bricks, somewhere between 4 and 6. And so what I'm saying is I don't know how we change yet, but I think the consumer, obviously everything's consumer driven, until the consumer has a choice and starts choosing this higher nutritional value food, then the other commodities are going to have to say, wait a second, why are we not selling as much as we used to? Oh, well, look at the consumer. They're buying this one that has a higher nutritional value.
Right. No, I agree. And it's like you said in the past, we all say, we grow for yield, and typically that's comes at the expense of quality, because there's only so much nutrient in the soil, you're applying foliars or whatever, and there's just so much, but yield is what pays the bills. So once quality starts paying the bills, once they get paid for quality, and we're going to get into that as we talk about Dan, then that'll make the difference.
Yeah. And so it was really interesting to hear Dan. At one point he even told me, he's like, it's not about the device, right? So Dan Kittredge, the Bionutrient Institute. By the way, Brad and I talked yesterday. If you haven't been to the Bionutrient Institute, and I have it pulled up here, I'll give you the web address. I think it's bionutrientinstitute.org, bionutrientinstitute.org. Please go check him out, and if you can, support what they're doing. I don't know, maybe Brad, but I don't know of anybody who is further along on this whole nutritional value piece than Kittredge.
Yeah, no, and when I first heard about him 6 or 7 years ago, I've thought this all along, that it will take a device like that we're going to dig into. It's not the device, it's the technology, or
Yeah.
the database, essentially, that is free. As we start talking, you'll be able to build your own meters, or it'll be in your phone. But yeah, once the consumer can go in and, like Dan said, shoot three different brands of carrots, and you get a reading of a 20 or a 50 and an 80. And I've always said, and I think I've been wrong all these years, because Dan alluded to what that will mean. I've always said, well, then the grower that's growing the 80 score carrot will get paid 3 times as much, and that's how things will change. And Dan brings up the point that what he believes is that, no, the people would, if everybody has this technology, when they score an 80 carrot, they're probably relatively priced the same. They buy that carrot and they're not buying the other carrots. Then those growers will consciously need to make the change to, hey, how is this? What is this grower doing that's making his carrot score higher than my carrots? And then that's what will drive the change.
I agree. I agree 100%. And I keep going back to that conversation as Dan was talking, and he was explaining the database that they're building, and that it's open source. As soon as he said that it was open source, my entrepreneurial capitalist brain
Yeah.
just exploded. And he was like he was reading my mind. Like, as he was talking to us, he was saying that, someone's going to go out there and take advantage of this thing and really commoditize it. And he said that's when it's going to go the wrong way. And I thought that was really interesting. He even mentioned organic, how, I don't know, I hate to say this, big industry or whatever took over organic, I don't know, maybe in the mid 2000s, and really kind of, in his terms, kind of tarnished the name of organic. And it was funny because when I was at the University of Hawaii, this was in early 2000s, and I I remember having a conversation with a couple of professors. I had a big idea I wanted to do, and they kind of steered me away from it. And the reason they steered me away from it is because they said, look at organic, Nick. Organic products have like 1% of the store shelves. This was in 2006. Okay. And he said, they're never going to have more than 1% of your grocery store shelf. This is a fad. This is a movement that is probably going to go away. They might have been correct if the big industry, your Kellogg's, your Danone's, your Tyson chicken, whoever, the big food producers, if they didn't jump in, that might have been a fad. It might have went away. But now organic, I don't know what the actual number is, but I can tell you every time I walk down the store shelf, the grocery store aisle, there's one product that's non-organic, and then a product right next to it that is organic, and it's not on the bottom of the shelf anymore. It's right at eye level. So I find it interesting that he said this, that that someone's going to get a hold of this technology and probably take it in the wrong direction, maybe make it a paid for service, and or maybe just kind of put their own label on it and call things a level 20 when they're only a level 10. So I think that space is very fragile right now.
Yeah, I think that to make it work, it essentially all his research needs to be completed. He needs, he says it takes $1 million per crop, and then 2 to 3 years to get the research done for that particular crop. So he's like this foundation, the Green Gene. It's all by donation. He's got to raise $1 million before he can go. He did beef. He's finishing up that. He's going into wheat, but there's another 300 or 400 fruits and vegetables and animals that need to be. So I think once that is in place, however long that takes, then it won't matter if everybody's cell phone has a blue beam of light that can read then it just fixes itself. But the technology, my head was just swimming after that podcast as he was talking about agronomists like us and the farmers having that tool in their hands where they can say they could shoot their tomato and say, oh, we're dragging a little bit in boron and cobalt. Well, let's add a little bit of that, and it's that's just mind blowing. That's, like he said, that's Star Trek stuff.
Yeah, it is. I always call it Star Wars kind of stuff, and we have some Star Wars technology already. That some of the soil tests that you and I use. I mean, I don't want to say it's simple, but the Haney soil health test is relatively simple.
Yeah.
It's relatively like it's unknown. Like the vast majority of growers in the United States have never had a Haney soil health test.
Right.
And that's I'm not going to take anything away from Rick Haney, what they built there, but now when you and I use it, it's so common for us to look at that kind of Star Wars kind of data about your soil health.
Yeah.
Then we look at genomic
Yeah.
sampling.
Sequencing.
You get those companies that are doing that, and then now you look at what Dan's talking about, and this little beam of light coming out of our cell phone. Or even just if you had a device, right? Even if you just had a device that was maybe sitting at the grocery store shelf where you could scan it yourself if they offered it. These things are so, they're so Star Wars kind of technology, but it's absolutely going to change an industry. It's going to change the way we farm. It's going to change the entire support network as far as infrastructure, trucking, shipping, because as well as I do, when an orange falls off a tree or it's picked, it immediately starts to degrade, right? Like the natural processes of not rotting, but they're starting to degrade very slowly once picked from the tree. So when you talk about shipping bananas or apples or oranges from Argentina or Israel or something like that, while they're on the airplane, while they're on the boat, they're going to be losing nutritional value. So I think it has far-reaching implications to the entire network that someone's going to have to figure out, because there's going to be a whole lot of loss there. But I think it will bring more domestic production to the things we want and use. I think it gives us more, I hate to get political here, but it gives us more food security, gives us more job security. I think that is a thing. I don't know how far away that is. We're probably a decade away from that kind of wholesale change, but it definitely has the ability, the implications to change the whole network.
Yeah, I know. I think in Dave's interview, he said he was just hoping by the year 2050, so 25 years from now, before we started really seeing. So I will never see that, but back to Dan's technology. If one of our listeners is a billionaire and he wants to help a cause, there's no better cause in this world. Now, granted, the Green Gene Foundation, we're a new foundation, and we need help and donations too, for our cause. But if somebody listening to this was just rolling in it and they're trying to figure out how to help humanity, that Bionutrient Food Association, if they had a huge chunk of money, they could knock this out in, I think Dan said, 3 years. He got so excited when I asked him what would he do, and he said, then it's over, it's done. And so I'm just throwing that out there. If anybody's got billions and they want to do something that one of the best causes in the world, it fixes everything and nobody gets hurt. I mean, we still need fertilizer. People, when I got into this, they would tell me all you need is biology and carbon. You don't have to. Well, that's bull hockey. In Florida, this is beach sand. And you've got a tomato plant that in reality only wants to put on one tomato so it can reproduce, and we want it to grow a bushel. So you have to have fertility. So everybody wins in this. There's no losers.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And by the way, if you're a billionaire and you're listening to this, I think Dan said that he needed $250 million and this thing's done, right? So we only need, hey, look, Matt would kill me for saying this, but if you wanted to donate like a couple 100,000 to the Green Gene Foundation, we'd be okay with that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and again, I see just the far-reaching implications, just the trucking, right? Just the infrastructure that it would take to adopt this new kind of system, because we would need to get food from the farm to the table so much quicker, or with so much more care. So everything would have to be refrigerated. Containers on ships or on rail cars would have to be refrigerated to try to preserve as much of that nutrient as possible. That creates innovation, right? That
Yeah.
creates jobs. Someone's going to have to now, build these trucks or build these containers. Someone's going to have to now work on these containers. I think it does a lot of really great things for not just the United States. I think for every country, right? Every country in the world today is waking up talking about how do we protect ourselves from other countries and being less dependent. Every country from China to the US to Mexico today is waking up trying to figure out, how do we protect ourselves and become
Hmm.
less dependent on everyone else in the world. And that's a difficult thing to do, and obviously it causes a lot of growing pains, as we're seeing right now in the world. But that really is probably the best way to go about it. I'm not saying that we don't need a worldwide industry and we don't need innovation around the globe, but I think these kind of technologies, and the fact that what Dan's doing is open source, I can't imagine when this database is completed, or even where it's at now, what some of these young people who know how to build websites and
Yeah.
build automated systems could use that data. And if you just had one farm that was 20,000 acres, you could jump out ahead of the entire industry and really start to make the change. Be the bellwether, be the reason why everyone else has to adopt your system.
Yeah, yeah, and you figure out what does and doesn't work, and
Mhm.
the basics as an agronomist and a consultant, the basics are always going to be there. Trying to keep living plants in the soil as much as possible. Anything to do to get carbon into the soil, that's how you build over time. But just being able to measure in real time what's working and what doesn't makes our job fun. Oh,
Yeah.
but yeah, and back to the what you were bringing up about the moving and the perishables. I mean, we know that the healthier or the more nutrient dense a product is, the longer the shelf life. I mean, you can prove that just by growing your own tomato and buying one
Mhm.
from the store and setting them out and put them in the refrigerator and see who lasts the longest. So that's
Yeah.
that solves a lot of that. But I think my favorite thing about the Dan was when, because labels don't matter anymore.
Mhm.
Will alluded to this greenwashing thing, and that's rampant. And I saw a bag of sugar the other day, and I should have bought it or took a picture of it. And I saw the regenerative label, but in bold print it said soil health, and that's the first time I had seen that greenwashing done in on a label.
Yeah.
But then everything goes out the window. The conventional, the regenerative, the organic, the local, none of that really matters. I mean, there's some
Mhm.
conventional guys that are putting out some really good, quality stuff, even though they're still using pesticides and a lot of these tools. But sometimes they're growing better quality than the organic guys. So
Yeah.
once you can just measure the quality of no matter how it's grown. I mean, I recommend paraquat to a lot of growers because I've done some research and trials that shows me that it's easier on soil than other chemicals, but it's really hard on the worker. You have to be very
Mhm.
careful. But so it's things like that. So I can, an organic guy can't use certain things, and some chemistries aren't as bad as others. But at
Right.
the end of the day, it's whatever process you've got to do to grow the quality. And then, you know, there's pesticide residue issues. That's the organic thing. They will have less pesticide residues, but sometimes they're just not growing the quality. It's just less residue. I went
Yeah,
down a rabbit.
and a grower can do everything right. right? They could adopt a system that you and I could devise, recommend, and they could adopt that, and they could do it for several years and still not reach the level of nutrition that they want or that they might expect from adopting this type of system to grow, focusing on soil health, focusing on the right chemistries to use. Mostly because, look, agriculture is still dependent on Mother Nature, right?
Right.
So, here in Florida, in Sarasota, I went to a seminar here a couple months ago, in middle of winter, and they were talking about the temperatures in Sarasota. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but our temperatures last year in 2024, I believe the evening temperatures were about 5 degrees warmer than the previous year. The day temperatures were like 2 point something degrees warmer than the previous year. There's a whole bunch of crops that respirate at night, right? So
Hmm.
like you've got pineapple and things like that respirate at night. But even if you're not respirating at night, even tomatoes and strawberries, there's a cool off period that allows the plant to relax, that allows the plant to sort of exhale and take a breath and say, okay, it's not sunny. We don't have to create as much carbohydrates or as much nutrients, and we're not processing sunlight into energy, photosynthesis, right? So when it's that warm in the evening, it's very hard on the plant to metabolize and to keep things healthy. So I think the problem that a lot of people I don't fully understand is that the fact that these growers are still, we could do everything right. You could babysit a row of tomatoes and put a lawn chair out there and sleep out there. You're still dependent. Half of your production is going to be dependent on Mother Nature. How much heat, how
Yeah.
much wind, how much rain, what was the soil temperature like at planting, what was the wind and the humidity level at, first leaf stage. All these things affect quality, and I think it's still very challenging for the grower. What I'm saying is we never throw the grower under the bus here, and you and I probably have never met a grower who didn't want to do it better, who didn't want to take care of their soils, who didn't want to increase nutrient
Sure.
value. I think every one of these guys and gals are doing everything they can to put out the highest quality product. There's just some things in agriculture we can't control.
Yeah, weather is such a huge factor. I mean,
Mm,
the too much, you don't think of too much sun for most crops. That's the whole goal, is to capture sunlight to photosynthesize. But
yeah.
you get a peak, and then things start going backwards. And when we have these super hot days, which I, people they're saying it's getting hotter, and I used to think it was just me. I'm getting older, so I feel it more intensely. But it's a huge difference. And then too much
Yeah.
water, not enough water. I mean, we can somewhat control not enough water. Most growers can, but that plant, it can't move into the shade. It's stuck out there. it's
Right.
it's planted.
I remember it was just before Debbie last year. I was looking at soil temperatures here in Florida. And for those of you who are joining us outside of Florida, this is the reason why Florida doesn't do a whole lot of crop production in the summer. We're just too hot. And no matter how much water, to Brad's point, you give it, you can't. It's really hard to raise tomatoes in the middle of August in Florida. It puts a huge toll on the plant. They just don't respirate. They don't grow as well. But I was looking at soil temperatures right before Debbie. We were in a pretty heavy drought at the time, and I think some of the soil temperatures, surface temperature, like 0 to 4 inches, was like 115 degrees.
Yeah,
Now imagine if your feet, while you sit at your desk today or you're sitting in your pickup driving, imagine if your feet were sitting in a pot of water that was 115 degrees, right? All day long. That's what the soil temperature, that's how big of effect that has. It's just hard for the plant to do its job when it's trying to mitigate the stress of high
yeah,
soil temperatures.
yeah.
Flip side of that, the Midwest this morning, right? They're
It's
planting
too
corn and
cold.
soybeans today, really hard. some of those soils are touching 45 degrees
Right. They can't
in
plant.
over the evening. Yeah, and they're planting. So those early corn and early soybeans, those roots are coming out, and they're like, "Well, gee, it's freezing. It's
Yeah.
too cold." So, I think it's it's really difficult to control everything in the environment, but I do think people, what Dan's doing, what David's doing, what Will's done, what Lundgren's doing, I can't stress enough the data that they're pulling, not just locally but globally, is going to benefit us all, and the industry will figure this out. I think you as a consumer have a lot of say. I know I've said this before, but if you have a relationship with your grocery store, your butcher, even your farmers market people, let them know what you want, right? Let them know that you want this, because if a farmer is going to invest in a new technology, they're only going to do it if they know there's a market, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to just go do something and hope that people buy it.
Right.
If enough of us tell them, then they'll probably make the adoption.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's got to be a need for it, and and growers, once growers that are adopting these practices, it makes their crops more resilient over time. If they're doing some cover cropping, if they're able to use it within a annual crop. I mean, that's keeping soil temperatures down. So there's ways to help offset some of the climate factors of too much heat, too much rain. But it's a process, and they've got to invest in that process, and that takes money. Oh, you know, I've always said it'll be more consumer driven, but I think there is a need for some of this government money to maybe
Mm.
go from one set port from some wherever it's going to help farmers to adopt some of these practices. I think that's what'll get the ball rolling and get things started.
Yeah, I agree. And right now, what we're doing here in the US and what our administration's focused on, you know, there's no there's no better investment to protect the United States and its food sources and food security than investing in the farmer. And
100%.
when you talk about how much money is required to, and once you start to look at how much acreage of farmland we have in the United States, you're talking about a really big bill. And so, I think it's hard for the government to do it. When you're looking at it as, from Washington, D.C., and you look at all these millions of acres, you're like, well, geez, how much money does each grower need to really make a difference? You start stacking that up, and you're like, well, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of investment to help
Yeah.
these growers make this type of change. So I think, look, after the last 4 weeks, I've been in agriculture not as long as you have, Brad, but I've been in it for the last 2 decades, and I have this overwhelming feeling like we are on the right track. I think it's still a small movement. There's definitely more people involved in food and nutrition than I was aware of a year ago. Thanks to the podcast, thanks to the Green Gene Foundation for giving us the opportunity. I would have never been able to talk to a Dan Kittredge, a David and Ann, or a Will, certainly Lundgren. And I used to live in South Dakota. I never talked to Lundgren there. Um,
Right.
I would have never had a chance to talk to these people unless we had this platform. So I think we're on the right track. I can't wait to do more. I can't wait to have everybody back. And again, going forward here, we've got another lineup of guests here that are really exciting and doing really great things on a local basis. So uh, I think we're in a good spot in the United States as far as agriculture goes. I think we're going to be the change for the world. Obviously, um, to use the administration's terms, there's going to be some pain, right? There's going to be some temporary
Right.
pain, but there's enough info, there's enough data to where it's not just a fad, it's not unproven. There's some real change about to happen.
Yeah. No, 100%. And it's the consumers, and it's podcasts like these and others. Google all these people that we've interviewed, these last four, what I call rock stars, and dig into their stuff. Read Ann and Dave's book, read Will's book, and it'll just help you to understand these concepts. And it's real. I mean, it helps farmers. It helps everybody.
You bet. You bet. Okay. Well, hey, thanks everybody for jumping on with us. Again, if you haven't had a chance, please jump on the greengenefoundation.org, our website, click on the podcast, subscribe there. The only thing you're going to get from that subscription is just a notification when Brad and I show up here on a Friday for you. And if you could, check out the Bionutrient Institute or Google the guests that we've had. They all have a way to get involved. They all have a way for you to help their cause or have other causes on their websites. Check them out, support them as much as you can. I can't see any better investment of your time or your money into these foundations, into these groups, to really help foster what we're all about here, which is food, agriculture, and nutrition, right? So thanks everybody for being on. We look forward to seeing you here again next week.
Take care.